Okay, now let's talk about the meat of your book, 1860 Change in a Thousand Years. And as I alluded to in the last episode, like inside the Chinese DNA, maybe they had this so-called chip on the shoulder because they were being attacked, like by the British. And, it's kind of funny when you look at the trade war that we have now between the US and China. The US has actually never really attacked the Chinese, right? But we are in a Cold War. Things are kind of heating up everywhere, right? Near the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and the geopolitical tension is unprecedented. Of course, like today, once again, the guest, it's CM Yan. He used to be a chairman of a publicly listed company, educated in Hong Kong and the UK. So you might have some mixed feelings about the British as well. You spent a few years there, right?
Thank you, Ed. Yes, you're right. Thank you for giving me this chance. Now, when you're talking about the present day, now, of course, when we live here, it is difficult for people to really understand what is going around us right now. But the best way to look through the mist is to really understand what went on, what was going on before.
But that difficult for the kids. The kids, they think about what happened last summer, right? The fight.
No, even that helps.
The extradition bill and then the fight for democracy. Like going back 160 years ago. Even if you talk about the Cultural Revolution, it's just too far-fetched. Even like June 4th Tiananmen in '89. I mean, it's way too far, right? For some people.
But all these were actually connected. Now, if you look at history as kind of ups and downs, and that is my own conclusion of the recent Chinese history for the last 160 years. It has been a lot of ups and downs. So, if that in that scenario, what we are seeing right now may be very similar.
Very dangerous.
What the British were seeing 160 years ago.
Yeah.
The same thing. It could be the same thing.
But the actors, they do change. It's China and the US. They just want to trade, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
At that time, it was China and Britain and France.
Right.
Now, US was actually involved at that time. But US was a friend to China at that time.
Right.
Because I just take an example. Everybody knows that the opium came from the British, but US has always been opposing the British selling opium to the Chinese at that time. Now, in a way, was US the friend of China? No, that is very interesting.
I understand. So if you want to lay the blame game to a country or a person, sometimes you have to go back in history, see how far in history you want to go back, right? Because most Hong Kong people, they think about the 155 years of colonial rule of Hong Kong, so people feel happy. And then when this drastic change happened over the last 23 years, especially under the national security law, people get upset and people are leaving, right? So it depends on which part of history we look into. People like, for instance, the Japanese culture. But if you talk about, the attack from Japan to China during Second World War, we might think differently, right? So this, again, the trilogy, what's the conclusion? Are you trying to hint something that there will be an imminent war coming up between the U.S. and China, and of course the presidential election of the U.S. is in less than 60 days. So anything can change without warning.
Right. Now, I have no crystal ball, right? So I don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. Now the conclusion I've made from studying this Opium War and writing these 3 books is that China's modernization right now has very deep root in the Opium War. That is when China's modernization started. So the best way, and I would advise everybody, all the Chinese and all the people who are interested in China, the best way to understand how the Chinese think and how the Chinese leaders think is to understand how the emperors was thinking, how the Sun Yat-sen was thinking, how the nationalists were thinking throughout these 160 years.
Yeah.
That would give us a very good guide of understanding how the modern Chinese are thinking. And if you don't understand how the Chinese are thinking, it is much more difficult to deal with them. And that was what happens when the West came to China.
Yeah. So the young activists who are fighting for democracy, maybe it's not a bad idea to go a little bit further, go way back in history, maybe up till the Qing Dynasty, because if you say this is where modernization of China come from, right? So at least study a little bit back, way back into the 18th century.
But throughout the humanities, that is not going to happen. Studying history and understanding what the leaders think has always been the job of the historians, of the elites. Now, young people, they of course they do things as they think fit, and all those revolutionaries, including Sun Yat-sen, they were young people. They didn't think so much about history. They used their judgment to make their actions, but their judgment was also based on the education they had received.
Well, Dr. Sun Yat-sen prided himself in having 6-7 years of his education in Hong Kong, Hong Kong U Medical School.
Right. That's what he emphasized.
Yeah.
Now,
and then the 2 local schools
when he
as well.
started revolution, he was only 29.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, we have all been gone through the age of 29, right? So we can understand what a 29-year-old kid would think. Of course, he is not going to go back to study all the history and understand everything.
Yeah.
It is up to the historians who do this and give good advice to people at the present time. And this is the way that the human civilization has been going on for so many years, including China.
I should recommend this book to Joshua Wong when I see him next at FCC. But I don't know whether I can
see whether he likes it.
Yeah, I don't know whether I can still have like a tea with him, since this would be considered as collusion with a foreign power, the FCC establishment. Kidding, of course. Well, jokes aside,
there is another conclusion. Another conclusion, which you may be interested, is China didn't abide to agreements at that time. China used to see agreements and contracts as
back then,
nothing more than a piece of paper. That was what the Chinese emperors did at that time. And that was also part of the reason that
did they honor the agreement they signed with the UK back then in 1860? That agreement, they did, right?
Now, look. Let me put it in a very simple terms. China signed 3 agreements during the Opium War. The Nanjing
one, yeah, people know that.
Agreement, Tianjin Agreement, and finally the Beijing Agreement. Now, for the first one and the second one, the emperor signed them no, well, not the emperor signed them. The emperor approved those agreements, but the emperor had never had any intention of a fulfilling or honoring the agreements, and that was the reason that the British had to come all the way 10,000 miles with 50 warships to start the war.
Right.
Only after China was defeated by the emperor's summer palace being burned down, completely defeated, then China honors the agreement, which was the last one, the Beijing Agreement.
I see some similarity already. If you say the Chinese never really want to honor any agreement they sign, so it's
right,
like
I was talking about the Opium War at that time.
Yeah.
The China didn't honor any agreement. Right.
I'm
so you
thinking more about what happened in 1984, the one that was signed.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So people can make their own conclusion.
Of course.
How much that is to be applicable nowadays.
Yeah. Well, 100 warships to China from UK. I see there's a military build-up somewhere near the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. But things, kind of tense right now. But in this day and age, nobody wants a real war. They just want, maybe at best a trade war. And if things could be reconciled, that would be good. But once again, CM, thank you so much. Of course, we are not going to talk about all the details about your book. Now, before we take off, I just want to ask you one last thing. Would you be toying with the idea of translating this book into other languages?
I would very much love to, but it's a huge task. It is within my plan. I want to rewrite it in English.
Yeah.
And I hope my book and my conclusion can help everybody, can help the Americans understand Chinese, help the Chinese understand themselves, and help the Chinese understand what the West would think. Probably the British 160 years ago would not be that much different from the West nowadays.
Yeah.
So,
I think even, those in power in mainland China, they should read it, because if they just study the CCP history, it's no use, right? Go back to Qing.
Well, I hope so, to understand what's going on,
Yeah.
in our ancestors' time.
Yeah.
And of course, as you said, nobody wants any war. That would be disastrous for everybody.
Thank you,
Right.
CM. Thank you again. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Bye-bye.
Bye.